The shadows cast by the gallows stretched long across Fort Laramie's dusty Main Street as Willow Jenkins stood with her head bowed, listening to the whispers that followed her like persistent flies. Wyoming Territory, 1874, was unforgiving to most, but especially to women with secrets as dark as hers. The early summer heat beat down mercilessly, making the collar of her faded blue dress stick uncomfortably to her neck as she hurried toward the general store, desperate to complete her errands before the stairs burned holes through her back. "Don't serve her kind here," Mr. Patterson said loudly when Willow placed her meager items on the counter. "We don't need your blood money." "It's just flour and sugar, Mr. Patterson," Willow said softly, her voice barely audible over the sudden silence that had fallen in the store. "I need to eat same as anyone. Same as my brother needed to live," Mrs. Thornton spat from behind her. "But your husband made sure that didn't happen, didn't he?" Willow's fingers tightened around her worn leather coin purse. She didn't bother correcting the woman, explaining that Jacob had never actually been her husband wouldn't change anything in their eyes. His sins had become hers the moment they'd shared a bed. "I didn't know what he was planning," Willow said, the words feeling hollow after repeating them so many times. "I never would have. Save it for the devil when you meet him," Patterson said, sweeping her items off the counter. "Now get out before I have the sheriff remove you." Head high despite the burning in her eyes, Willow turned and walked out of the store, the bell above the door announcing her shame to anyone who hadn't already been watching. 6 months since Jacob's hanging, and Fort Laramie still treated her like she'd helped him rob that stagecoach and murder the guard herself. The boarding house had evicted her 3 months ago. The laundry had fired her last month. Now, even buying basic supplies was becoming impossible. At 22, Willow was running out of options faster than she was running out of the small cache of coins she'd managed to save. She was so lost in thought, calculating how many more days she could make her supplies last in the small one-room cabin she'd found on the outskirts of town, that she didn't notice the man until she collided with his broad chest. "Whoa there," came a deep voice as strong hands steadied her. "Are you all right, miss?" Willow stepped back quickly, her cheeks flushing as she looked up into the face of a stranger, a handsome one, with eyes the color of whiskey and hair the warm brown of freshly turned earth. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the way he carried himself spoke of hard work and harder travels. "I'm fine," she said stiffly, acutely aware of how the townsfolk were watching. This poor man didn't know he was ruining his reputation in Fort Laramie just by speaking to her. "Excuse me." She tried to step around him, but he shifted, blocking her path without seeming intentional about it. "Name's Owen Sutton," he said, tipping his hat. "Just rode in looking for work. Couldn't help but notice what happened in there." He nodded toward the store. "Seems to me a lady shouldn't have to go hungry because folks can't mind their own business." Willow stared at him, searching for the mockery or judgment she'd grown accustomed to seeing, but found only genuine concern in his expression. "Mr. Sutton, you're new here, so let me give you some advice," she said quietly. "Being seen talking to me won't do you any favors. This town has a long memory." "Good thing I don't much care what towns think," Owen replied easily. "And I didn't catch your name, miss." Despite herself, Willow felt a smile tug at her lips. "Willow Jenkins. Miss Jenkins," he said, as if trying out the sound of her name. "Would you allow me to help you acquire whatever supplies you were denied in there? I'm a fair hand at negotiating." "Why would you do that?" Willow asked, suspicion creeping in. Men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. That was one lesson Jacob had taught her well. Owen shrugged. "My ma raised me to believe a person should be judged by their own actions, not by what others say about them." His eyes crinkled at the corners. Besides, I've been on the receiving end of small-town judgment myself a time or two. Before Willow could respond, Sheriff Davis appeared at her elbow, his hand resting meaningfully on his holster. "Is this man bothering you, Miss Jenkins?" he asked, though his tone made it clear who he thought the problem was. "No, Sheriff," Willow answered quickly. "Just exchanging pleasantries." "Mr. Sutton, is it?" The sheriff turned his attention to Owen. "You're new to Fort Laramie. There are things about certain residents you ought to know." Owen straightened to his full height, a good 3 inches taller than the sheriff. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but I make it a point to form my own opinions about people." Sheriff Davis's eyes narrowed. "That's your prerogative, but don't say you weren't warned." He tipped his hat stiffly. "Miss Jenkins, I suggest you head back to your cabin. Town's busy today." As the sheriff walked away, Owen turned back to Willow with a raised eyebrow. "Popular with the local law, I see." "He was Jacob's friend once," Willow said before she could stop herself. "Now he makes sure I know exactly how far I've fallen." Jacob. Willow hesitated, then decided this stranger would hear the story soon enough anyway. "Jacob Turner, the man I lived with. They hanged him 6 months ago for murder and robbery." She lifted her chin, meeting Owen's gaze directly. "I didn't know what he was planning, but nobody believes that. They think I helped him, or at least knew and kept quiet." She waited for the disgust to cross his face for him to make some excuse and walk away as others had done. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "Reckon that's why you can't get served at the store, among other places," Willow admitted. "I should go." "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Sutton, but let me help," he interrupted. "You need supplies. I need to make a good impression somewhere in this town if I'm going to find work. Let me get what you need and you can pay me back." He smiled, and Willow felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "No strings attached." Willow hesitated. Pride told her to refuse, but practicality reminded her that her flour barrel was nearly empty. "Why would you help a stranger?" "Because I've been hungry before," Owen said simply. "And because sometimes a stranger is exactly what a person needs when everyone else has turned their back." Something in his words struck a chord deep within her. Willow found herself nodding. "All right, Mr. Sutton. I'll accept your help just this once." Owen's smile widened. "Excellent. Now, what do you need from that store?" 20 minutes later, Owen emerged from the general store with a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Willow had waited around the corner, out of sight, her heart hammering with anxiety that he might simply take her money and disappear. But there he was, striding toward her with a satisfied grin and her supplies. "Mr. Patterson drives a hard bargain," Owen said, handing her the package and her remaining coins. "But he's not immune to the charms of a man who claims to be considering buying his cousin's ranch outside of town." Willow's eyes widened. "You lied to him." Owen shrugged. "I simply expressed interest in a hypothetical property. Not my fault if he jumped to conclusions." His eyes twinkled with mischief. "I did, however, manage to get him to throw in some coffee at a reduced price. Figured you might need it." Willow clutched the package to her chest, overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "I don't know how to repay you." "No need," Owen said. "But I am looking for work. Any suggestions for a man handy with horses and cattle?" Willow thought for a moment. "The Parker Ranch might be hiring. It's about 5 miles north of town. Mr. Parker keeps to himself, doesn't listen much to town gossip." "Perfect," Owen said. "I'll head there tomorrow." He hesitated, then added, "Where can I find you if I need to return this way?" Willow knew she should brush him off, save him from the taint of her reputation, but something in his eyes, a genuine interest, a kindness she'd almost forgotten existed, made her answer honestly. "I have a small cabin about a mile east of town. near the bend in the river. It's not much, but it's home for now. Owen nodded. I'll remember that. He tipped his hat again. Good day, Miss Jenkins. I hope our paths cross again. As he walked away, Willow found herself watching him longer than propriety dictated, wondering what twist of fate had brought Owen Sutton to Fort Laramie on the very day she'd reached her breaking point. The next week passed in a blur of solitude for Willow. Spring was giving way fully to summer, and she spent her days tending the small garden behind her cabin, fishing in the river, and trying to make her meager supplies stretch. The isolation wore on her before Jacob. She'd been a social creature, working at the hotel and attending church socials. Now, the only conversation she had was with herself, and occasionally with the chickens she'd managed to acquire from a sympathetic farmer outside town. She was collecting eggs one morning when she heard the approach of a horse. Heart-racing visitors usually meant trouble. She stepped out of the chicken coop to see Owen Sutton dismounting from a chestnut gelding. "Mr. Sutton," she said, surprised at how pleased she felt to see him. "I didn't expect you'd actually come by. Said I would, didn't I?" Owen replied, leading his horse to the small water trough. "Got that job at Parker's ranch. Thought I'd bring you news and—" He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package. "Some fresh bread from Mrs. Parker. She's a fine baker." Willow accepted the package, inhaling the yeasty scent of freshly baked bread. "That's very kind. Would you like some coffee? It's the least I can offer in return." Owen's smile warmed his entire face. "I'd be obliged." Inside her small cabin, Willow busied herself with the coffee pot, acutely aware of Owen taking in her humble surroundings. The cabin was tiny but clean, with a bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a chest for her few belongings, and a stone fireplace. She'd hung curtains she'd sewn herself at the single window, and wildflowers brightened the table. "It's not much," she said defensively, "but it's better than sleeping under the stars." "It's a fine place," Owen said, removing his hat as he sat at her table. "Reminds me of where I grew up in Texas. Simple but honest." Willow set the coffee pot on the fire and joined him at the table. "How are you finding work at Parker's?" "Good, honest work," Owen said. "Parker doesn't talk much, but he's fair. His wife's taken a shine to me, keeps trying to fatten me up." He patted his flat stomach and grinned. Willow smiled. "Mrs. Parker was always kind to me before, well, before everything." Owen's expression grew serious. "I've heard more about what happened. Town's full of talk." Willow tensed. "I'm sure it is. And now you regret helping me, I expect." "No," Owen said firmly. "I don't put much stock in gossip. I'd rather hear your side if you're willing to tell it." The coffee pot began to whistle, giving Willow a moment to collect her thoughts as she poured 2 cups and returned to the table. She hadn't told her story, really told it to anyone since the sheriff had interrogated her after Jacob's arrest. "I came to Fort Laramie in '71, she began, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. "I was 18, newly orphaned. My parents died of fever back in Missouri, and I had an aunt here who offered to take me in." She took a sip of coffee. "Aunt Martha died 6 months after I arrived. I got work at the hotel, cleaning rooms, serving in the dining room. That's where I met Jacob." Owen listened intently as she continued. "He was charming, handsome. Told me he was a cattle broker, traveled between ranches making deals. He'd come to town every few weeks, always stayed at the hotel, always requested that I serve his meals." Willow's voice grew softer. "I was lonely, young, flattered by his attention. When he asked me to leave the hotel and move into a house with him, I said yes, even though—" She trailed off. "Even though you weren't married," Owen finished for her. Willow nodded, expecting judgment, but Owen's expression remained neutral. "He was gone more often than he was home," she continued. "I didn't question where he went or what he did. I was just happy when he returned." Her hands tightened around her mug. "Then one day the sheriff came. Said Jacob had robbed a stagecoach, killed the guard. They caught him trying to flee to Colorado." "Did you know anything about it?" Owen asked quietly. "No," Willow said fiercely. "I swear on my parents' graves I knew nothing." Jacob kept his business to himself. But there had been other robberies, 4 of them all when Jacob was supposedly away on business. The prosecution claimed I must have known, must have helped somehow. "But they couldn't prove it," Owen observed. "They tried. Sheriff Davis questioned me for hours. But in the end, they didn't have enough to charge me." She laughed bitterly. "Not that it mattered to the town. Jacob Turner's whore, they called me. Said I seduced him into a life of crime, or that I enjoyed the money he brought home without asking questions." "What happened after the trial?" "They hanged him 3 days later. I watched, felt I owed him that much." Willow's eyes grew distant. "He looked at me just before they put the hood on. No remorse, no apology, just a wink like we shared some secret." She shuddered at the memory. "That's when I knew I'd never really known him at all." Owen reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. "And since then, I've been dying slowly in this town," Willow admitted. "Can't get work, can't buy supplies without someone acting as my proxy. The women cross the street to avoid me. The men either proposition me, thinking I'm no better than a soiled dove now, or they spit at my feet." "Why stay?" Owen asked. "Why not start fresh somewhere else?" It was a question Willow had asked herself countless times. "Where would I go? I have no family, hardly any money, and part of me." She hesitated, then decided honesty was the least she owed this man who'd shown her kindness. "Part of me feels I deserve this punishment for being so blind, so stupid." "You don't," Owen said firmly. "Being deceived isn't a crime." "Try telling that to Fort Laramie," Willow replied with a sad smile. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the small clock on the mantel. "Thank you," Owen finally said, "for telling me." "Thank you for listening," Willow replied. "It's been a long time since anyone wanted to hear my side." Owen finished his coffee and stood. "I should get back to the ranch. Parker's got me breaking horses this afternoon." At the door, he turned back to her. "Would it be all right if I visited again? Maybe bring some supplies from town next time I'm there." Willow hesitated. Part of her wanted to protect him from the inevitable gossip that would swirl if he was seen associating with her. But a larger part, the part starved for human connection, couldn't bring herself to refuse. "I'd like that," she said softly, "but be careful. This town has a way of turning on people who show me kindness." Owen's smile was confident, almost defiant. "I've weathered worse storms than small-town gossip, Miss Jenkins. I'll take my chances." As she watched him ride away, Willow felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, but present nonetheless. True to his word, Owen returned the following week, and then again the week after that. Each visit brought small gifts, coffee, sugar, occasionally a book borrowed from Mrs. Parker. More precious than the gifts, though, was his company. They would sit at her small table, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Owen told her about growing up on a small farm in Texas, about losing his parents to a Comanche raid when he was 15, about working his way north over the years, never staying in one place too long. "What are you running from?" Willow asked him one evening in early July as they sat on her small porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Owen looked surprised. "What makes you think I'm running?" "A man doesn't wander for years without purpose," Willow observed. "You're either running from something or searching for something." Owen was silent for so long that Willow thought she might have offended him. Finally, he said, "Maybe a bit of both, running from memories, searching for belonging, I suppose." "Have you found it, belonging?" His eyes met hers, steady and warm in the fading light. "I'm starting to think I might have." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Willow looked away first, her cheeks warm. "The town's talking about us," she said, changing the subject. "Mrs. Cooper, who sells eggs in town, told me people are saying you're bewitched by me." Owen laughed. "Is that what they're calling it now?" "It's not funny, Owen," Willow said, using his first name without thinking. "Your reputation, my reputation, is my own concern," Owen interrupted gently. "And I think bewitched might not be too far off the mark." Willow's heart fluttered in her chest. She'd been fighting her growing feelings for Owen, telling herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to kindness after so much cruelty. But in moments like this, with his eyes soft on her face and his words hinting at deeper emotions, it became harder to deny the truth. "You shouldn't say such things," she whispered. "Why not? It's the truth." Owen shifted closer on the porch step. "Willow." The sound of approaching horses cut him off. They both stood as three riders appeared on the path to her cabin, their forms dark against the twilight sky. "Stay here," Owen said, moving to stand in front of her as the riders approached. Willow recognized them as the Baker brothers, Tom, John, and the youngest, Elias, sons of one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. They'd been among Jacob's drinking companions, and since his death, they'd made their contempt for Willow abundantly clear. "Well, well," Tom, the eldest, called as they reined in their horses. "Looks like the rumors are true. Owen Sutton's taken up with Jacob's leftovers." Owen's posture stiffened, but his voice remained calm. "Evening, gentlemen. Something I can help you with?" "Just passing by," John said, his words slightly slurred. "Thought we'd check if Turner's woman had found herself a new man to manipulate." "You're drunk," Owen observed. "Best you head home before you say something you'll regret." Elias, barely 20 and always eager to prove himself to his brothers, spat on the ground. "Ain't saying nothing that ain't true. Everyone knows what she is." "And what's that exactly?" Owen's voice had developed a dangerous edge. "A whore who helped rob and kill innocent men," Tom said bluntly. "You're a fool if you think otherwise, Sutton." Willow stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Owen's arm. "Please just go," she said to the brothers. "I've done nothing to you." "Your man killed our friend," John said. "Pete Walsh was on that last stagecoach, remember him? Or were you too busy counting the money Jacob brought home?" Owen moved so quickly that Willow barely saw him before he had John's horse by the bridle, forcing the animal to back up. "I won't ask again," Owen said, his voice deadly quiet. "Ride away. Now." Tom's hand moved to his holster. "Or what, Cowboy? You'll take on all three of us, if I have to." Owen didn't reach for his own gun, but his stance made it clear he was ready for whatever came next. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Elias, the least drunk of the three, put a hand on Tom's arm. "Come on," he muttered. "Not worth getting shot over." Tom glared at Owen, then at Willow. "This isn't over. People in this town have long memories." "Then make sure you remember this," Owen said evenly. "Miss Jenkins is under my protection now. Anyone who has a problem with her has a problem with me." The brothers exchanged looks, then Tom yanked his horse's head around. "Let's go. Parker's new hand isn't worth the bullets." They rode off, dust rising in their wake. Only when they were out of sight did Owen's shoulders relax slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked Willow, turning to find her pale in the gathering darkness. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice shaking. "You've just made yourself a target." "They were drunk and looking for trouble," Owen dismissed. "They'll sober up and forget about it." "No, they won't," Willow insisted. "The Bakers don't forget slights, real or imagined, and now you've publicly aligned yourself with me." She wrapped her arms around herself. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen." Owen stepped closer, tentatively placing his hands on her shoulders. "Willow, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. "I meant what I said. You're not alone in this anymore." "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" Owen's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. "Because in the weeks I've known you, I've seen your strength, your kindness, your determination to survive despite everything this town has thrown at you. Because when I'm with you, I don't feel like a drifter anymore." His voice softened. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Willow Jenkins, and that's worth any risk." Willow's breath caught in her throat. "Owen, you don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know it's too soon, and you've been hurt." Willow rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, effectively silencing him. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but when she pulled back, Owen was looking at her with such wonder that her heart seemed to skip a beat. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "But I'm scared, Owen, not just of the town, but of trusting again, of being wrong again." "We'll take it slow," Owen promised, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Day by day, but Willow, I want you to know I'm not going anywhere. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." As the fireflies continued their dance around them and the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky, Willow allowed herself to believe him. The confrontation with the Baker brothers marked a turning point. Word spread quickly through Fort Laramie that Owen Sutton had publicly declared himself Willow's protector, and the already cool reception he received in town chilled further. Parker heard the gossip, but, true to form, said nothing beyond asking if Owen's personal affairs would interfere with his work. "No, sir," Owen had assured him. "What I do on my own time is separate from my duties here." Parker had nodded, seemingly satisfied, but his wife had pulled Owen aside later. "You're playing with fire, young man," Mrs. Parker warned. "That girl's been marked by this town." "With all due respect, madam, Willow's been judged unfairly," Owen replied. "She had no part in what Jacob Turner did." Mrs. Parker's expression softened. "I believe you. I always thought Willow was a good girl who made a poor choice in men." She patted his arm. "Just be careful. Fort Laramie isn't kind to those who challenge its judgments." Owen took her warning to heart, but didn't change his behavior. If anything, he became more open about his relationship with Willow, riding into town with her on occasion, standing firm beside her as she endured the whispers and stares. August arrived with scorching heat and gathering storm clouds. Willow's garden flourished under her care, providing vegetables that she preserved for the coming winter. Owen brought game when he hunted rabbits, occasionally a deer, and taught her to shoot the small pistol he gave her, just in case. They were careful, proper in public, but in private, their relationship deepened. Stolen kisses became longer embraces. Conversations about the day evolved into discussions of the future, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. "I've been saving," Owen told her one evening as they sat by the river, feet dangling in the cool water. "Every penny Parker pays me that doesn't go to necessities. By spring, I should have enough for a small stake of my own." "Your own ranch?" Willow asked, watching a heron stalk fish in the shallows. Owen nodded. "Nothing fancy at first, but good land, some cattle to start, room to grow." He glanced at her. "Room for a family someday." Willow's heart quickened. "Owen Sutton, are you making plans that include me?" "Every plan I make includes you," he said simply. "If you'll have me." She leaned against his shoulder, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. "I think I might, Cowboy, I think I might." The next morning, Willow woke to pounding on her door. She threw on a robe and hurried to answer it, finding Mrs. Parker on her doorstep, face drawn with worry. "It's Owen," she said without preamble. "There's been trouble." Willow's blood ran cold. What happened? Is he hurt? Not yet, Mrs. Parker said grimly. But he will be if something isn't done. The Baker boys accused him of stealing a horse, one of their prize stallions. Sheriff Davis arrested him an hour ago. That's ridiculous, Willow said, already moving to dress. Owen would never steal anything, let alone a horse everyone would recognize. Of course not, Mrs. Parker agreed. But Tom Baker claims he saw Owen riding it near your cabin last night, says he must have hidden it in the woods nearby. Willow froze in the act of buttoning her dress. Owen was with me last night. He left around 9 to ride back to your ranch. I know, dear. Mr. Parker said he arrived home not long after, but the Bakers have influence and the sheriff, well, he's not exactly impartial where you're concerned. Because of Jacob, Willow said bitterly. Yes, and now Owen is paying for that connection, Mrs. Parker's kind face hardened with determination. Mr. Parker has gone to town to speak on Owen's behalf, but I thought you should know. I'm coming with you, Willow said, finishing with her buttons and reaching for her boots. Owen stood up for me. I won't let him face this alone. The ride to Fort Laramie was tense, with Mrs. Parker unusually quiet. As they approached the town, she finally spoke. Willow, you should know there's talk that this isn't just about a horse. Tom Baker's been saying that Owen was involved in a stage robbery near Cheyenne last month. Says that's how he got money to court you. Willow's hands tightened on the reins. That's absurd. Owen works honest days for your husband. I know that, but the timing's suspicious, they say. A robbery with the same method Jacob Turner used, right when Owen starts spending time with Jacob's woman. I'm not Jacob's woman, Willow said sharply, and Owen is nothing like Jacob. Mrs. Parker patted her hand. I believe you, dear, but you need to be prepared for what you'll face in town. What awaited them in Fort Laramie was worse than Willow had imagined. A crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, and angry voices carried on the hot summer air. Mr. Parker stood on the boardwalk, arguing with Sheriff Davis, while Tom Baker looked on with barely concealed satisfaction. There she is, someone called as Willow dismounted. Turner's woman come to save another criminal. Willow ignored the jeers, pushing through the crowd to reach Mr. Parker's side. Where is he? She demanded of the sheriff. I want to see Owen. Sheriff Davis's face hardened. This doesn't concern you, Miss Jenkins. It concerns me when you arrest an innocent man on false charges, Willow retorted. Owen Sutton is no horse thief, and you know it. What I know, the sheriff said coldly, is that we found Baker's stallion tied up in the woods not half a mile from your cabin. And I know that Owen Sutton has been spending an awful lot of time with a woman connected to the most notorious stagecoach robber this territory has seen. That doesn't prove anything, Mr. Parker interjected. Sutton's worked honest and hard for me since the day I hired him, never given me reason to doubt him. Maybe he fooled you, Tom Baker called out. Just like Turner fooled everyone. Birds of a feather, I say. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Willow felt despair rising within her, threatening to overwhelm her composure. Then the door to the sheriff's office opened, and Owen was led out in handcuffs. His face was bruised, a cut above his eye crusted with dried blood. When he saw Willow, his expression shifted from defiance to concern. Willow, you shouldn't be here, he said as the sheriff pushed him forward. Neither should you, she answered, moving to his side despite the sheriff's warning look. This is madness, Owen. Tell them you didn't do this. I've been telling them since dawn, Owen said wearily. They're not interested in the truth. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. Owen Sutton, you're being charged with horse theft with additional charges pending regarding the Cheyenne stagecoach robbery. You'll be held until the circuit judge arrives next week. This is a farce, Mr. Parker protested. You have no real evidence. We have the horse, we have a witness who saw Sutton near where it was hidden, and we have his connection to a known criminal," the sheriff countered. "That's enough to hold him. I was with Willow until 9 last night, then rode straight back to Parker's ranch," Owen said for what was clearly not the first time. "I never saw Baker's horse, let alone stole it." Tom Baker stepped forward, his face twisted with malice. "Convenient that your only alibi is a woman no decent person would believe. Turner's woman vouching for Turner's successor." Something snapped in Willow at those words. All the months of enduring whispers, of being judged for a crime she hadn't committed, of trying to rebuild her life while the town seemed determined to destroy it, all crystallized into a cold, clear fury. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "I am not Turner's woman. I am Willow Jenkins. I was deceived by Jacob Turner just as this town was. I never knew what he was planning, never benefited from his crimes, and have paid for his sins far longer than justice demands." She turned to face the crowd, meeting their hostile stares. "You've shunned me, refused me work, denied me basic decency, all because it was easier to blame the woman than admit you were all fooled by the man. And now you're doing it again, condemning an innocent man because he dared to show me kindness." "Pretty speech," Tom Baker sneered. "But words don't change facts. We found the horse, which you probably put there yourself," Willow interrupted, her accusation causing gasps from the crowd. "You threatened Owen weeks ago, right on my doorstep, said it wasn't over." Sheriff Davis frowned. "Is this true, Baker?" Tom's face reddened. "She's lying. Why would I steal my own horse?" "To frame the man who humiliated you," Mr. Parker suggested mildly. "Seems more likely than Owen Sutton, who has no need for more horses and enough sense not to steal from the most influential family in the territory." A murmur of uncertainty passed through the crowd. Willow pressed her advantage. "Sheriff Davis, you knew Jacob. You drank with him, played cards with him. Did you ever suspect what he was really doing when he left town?" When the sheriff didn't answer, she continued, "None of us did. He fooled us all, but I'm the only one still being punished for it." She stepped closer to Owen, standing shoulder to shoulder with him despite his restraints. "I know what it's like to be judged guilty without evidence. Owen does not deserve that fate. If you're going to hold him, then arrest me too. At least then we'll both have company while we wait for justice." For a long moment, silence held the crowd in its grip. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Parker spoke. "Willow's right," she said clearly. "We've been unfair to her. I've watched her since she was a girl, and there's not a dishonest bone in her body. If she says Owen Sutton is innocent, I believe her." One of the older men in the crowd, the blacksmith, cleared his throat. "Jacob Turner was a smooth-talking devil. Borrowed money from me once, never paid it back. Can't really blame the girl for being taken in by him. Lord knows he fooled smarter folks than her." More voices joined in, some still hostile, but others questioning, uncertain. Sheriff Davis looked increasingly uncomfortable as the tide of public opinion began to shift. "This doesn't change the fact that we found the horse," he insisted, but with less conviction. "Then investigate who really put it there," Mr. Parker suggested, "starting with the men who have a grudge against Owen Sutton." Tom Baker's face contorted with anger. "This is ridiculous. My family won't stand for being accused. Your family doesn't stand above the law," came a new voice, and everyone turned to see Judge Wilson, who had apparently arrived in town early. His stern face surveyed the scene with disapproval. "What's going on here, Sheriff?" As the sheriff explained the situation, Judge Wilson's frown deepened. Finally, he cut Davis off mid-sentence. "Release that man," he ordered, pointing at Owen. "Holding someone on such flimsy evidence is a disgrace to your badge, Davis. But, Your Honor, no buts." I'll look into this matter properly tomorrow after I've rested from my journey. If there's evidence of a crime, we'll proceed accordingly, but I won't have frontier justice in my jurisdiction." The judge's eyes swept over the crowd. "This gathering is over. Go about your business, all of you." With obvious reluctance, Sheriff Davis unlocked Owen's handcuffs. The crowd began to disperse, Tom Baker storming off with his brothers trailing behind him. Owen rubbed his wrists, his eyes never leaving Willow's face. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. "Standing up to the whole town like that." "You did it for me," she replied simply. "Did you think I wouldn't do the same for you?" Mr. Parker cleared his throat. "Best get back to the ranch, Sutton. After all this excitement, I think we could both use some of Mrs. Parker's lemonade." Owen nodded. "I'll be along shortly, sir. If you don't mind, I'd like a moment with Miss Jenkins first." Once the Parkers had moved away, Owen took Willow's hands in his. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said softly. "Standing up to the whole town for me." Willow managed a small smile. "It wasn't just for you. It was for me too, for both of us." Owen glanced around at the few remaining onlookers, then back to her. "I meant what I said about building a future, but after today, I'm not sure it can be here. This town might never fully accept either of us. Then we'll build our future alone," Willow said, echoing words he'd once spoken to her. "Somewhere else, if need be. Somewhere we can start fresh." Owen's face softened with love and determination. "Together." "Together," Willow agreed. And for the first time since Jacob's betrayal, she felt completely, unequivocally certain of her path forward. Judge Wilson's investigation the next day revealed what Willow and Owen had already suspected. The Baker brothers had indeed planted the stallion near Willow's cabin, hoping to frame Owen. Elias, the youngest, broke under the judge's stern questioning, admitting that Tom had conceived the plan after Owen humiliated them that night at Willow's cabin. The stagecoach robbery allegation was similarly dismissed, as Owen had been working at Parker's ranch when it occurred, with multiple witnesses to verify his presence. Tom and John Baker were fined for their false accusations, and Judge Wilson ordered them to stay away from both Owen and Willow. The public censure of the Baker family, previously considered untouchable in Fort Laramie, sent ripples through the community. More significantly, Willow's impassioned speech seemed to have cracked, if not broken, the wall of hostility around her. Some people still crossed the street to avoid her, but others began to nod in greeting. Mr. Patterson at the general store grudgingly served her when she next came in, and the whispers behind her back grew less frequent, less harsh. "It's a start," Owen said encouragingly when Willow marveled at the change. "People can change their minds given reason and time." They were sitting on her porch steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. September had arrived, bringing cooler evenings and the first hints of autumn to the cottonwoods along the river. "Maybe," Willow agreed cautiously, "but I'm not sure I want to wait for this town's approval anymore." She turned to face him. "I've been thinking about what you said. About starting fresh somewhere else." Owen raised an eyebrow. And I think you're right. Fort Laramie holds too many ghosts for both of us." She took a deep breath. "When you're ready to claim that land you've been saving for, I want to go with you, as your wife, if you'll still have me." Owen's face broke into a smile of such pure joy that Willow's breath caught. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this around for weeks," he admitted, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. "It was my mother's. I've been waiting for the right moment to ask you." Willow's eyes filled with tears as Owen slid off the porch step to kneel before her. "Willow Jenkins, I fell in love with you the moment I saw you stand up to that shopkeeper with your head held high, even though your heart was breaking. I love your strength, your kindness, your ability to hope even when the world gives you every reason to despair." His voice grew thick with emotion. "I want to build a life with you wherever we go, whatever we face. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Willow whispered, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Owen Sutton, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger a little loose, but perfect nonetheless, Willow felt the last shadows of Jacob Turner's legacy finally begin to fade. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Willow embraced that uncertainty with joy rather than fear. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Parker Ranch. Mrs. Parker insisted on hosting, decorating the barn with wildflowers and paper lanterns. To Willow's surprise, several townspeople attended, including the blacksmith and his wife, the schoolteacher, and even Mr. Patterson from the general store, who gruffly presented them with a set of tin plates for your new home, wherever it may be. Judge Wilson performed the ceremony, his formal manner softening as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Owen kissed her, Willow felt the world around them fade away, the guests, the decorated barn, even Fort Laramie itself. In that moment, there was only Owen, the man who had seen past her shame to the woman beneath. "Mrs. Sutton," he whispered against her lips when they finally parted, and Willow felt a thrill at her new name, her new identity, her new beginning. They spent their wedding night in the small cabin by the river, now filled with whispered promises and gentle explorations. In the quiet darkness, Willow finally surrendered the last of her walls, allowing Owen to see all of her fears, her hopes, her soul laid bare. His tenderness brought tears to her eyes, and when they came together as husband and wife for the first time, Willow understood at last what it meant to be truly loved, truly known. As dawn broke, they lay tangled together, planning their future in hushed, excited voices. "Colorado," Owen suggested, tracing patterns on Willow's bare shoulder. "The land is good there and it's growing fast, or maybe north to Montana Territory." "Wherever we go," Willow said, nestling closer to his warmth, "as long as we're together, I'll be home." They spent the winter at Parker's ranch, Owen working with the cattle while Willow helped Mrs. Parker with household duties. They saved every penny, and by the time spring brought new green to the Wyoming plains, they had enough for a modest start. News came of land opening up in northern Colorado, where the railroad was expanding and new settlements were springing up along its path. After much discussion and careful planning, Owen and Willow decided this would be their destination. Their last night in Fort Laramie, they returned to the little cabin by the river. Empty now of Willow's belongings, it seemed smaller somehow, the shadows longer. "It's strange," Willow said, standing in the doorway. "I was so unhappy here, and yet it brought us together," Owen finished for her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Every hardship led us to each other." Willow turned in his embrace. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help me that day?" Owen shook his head. "No, because I couldn't have done anything else. One look at you, standing there with your head high despite everything, and I was lost." "My knight in dusty denim," Willow teased, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. The next morning they loaded their wagon with their few possessions, Willow's books and quilts, Owen's tools, the wedding gifts from the Parkers and the townsfolk, supplies for the journey ahead. As they prepared to depart, a small group gathered to see them off. Mrs. Parker pressed a package into Willow's hands. "Seed packets," she explained, "for your new garden. And some of my sourdough starter. I know how Owen loves my bread." Mr. Parker shook Owen's hand firmly. "You're a good man, Sutton. You'll make a success of whatever you put your hand to." Even Sheriff Davis appeared, awkwardly offering his good wishes. "No hard feelings, I hope," he said to Owen. "I was just doing my job." "Of course," Owen replied diplomatically, though his grip on the sheriff's hand might have been a touch firmer than necessary. As they climbed onto the wagon, Willow took one last look at Fort Laramie. For all its painful memories, it had given her Owen, and for that she could almost forgive its cruelty. "Ready?" Owen asked, taking the reins. Willow nodded, sliding her hand into his. "Ready." The wagon lurched forward, and Fort Laramie began to recede behind them. Ahead lay uncertainty, hard work, and undoubtedly new challenges. But beside her sat the man who had taught her to trust again, to love again, to believe in second chances. "Then we'll build our future alone," he had said. And in those words, Willow had found not isolation but freedom from judgment, from the past, from the weight of Jacob's legacy. As the Wyoming landscape stretched before them, Willow felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but redemption. The journey to Colorado took 2 weeks, through rolling grasslands and along the foothills of the Rockies. They encountered other travelers heading the same direction: farmers, merchants, young families, all drawn by the promise of new land and new opportunities. By early June 1875, they reached the small but growing settlement of Silver Creek, nestled in a fertile valley with mountains rising majestically to the west. The railroad had reached the town just months earlier, bringing with it a surge of development. A main street boasted a general store, a hotel, a blacksmith, and even a small bank. Beyond the town center, homesteaders were establishing farms and ranches on the surrounding land. Owen and Willow found a plot that suited their needs: 160 acres with a stream running through it, grassland for cattle, and a stand of pines that would provide timber for building. The previous owner, an elderly widower returning east to live with his daughter, sold it to them for a fair price, throwing in his small cabin and barn as part of the deal. "It needs work," Owen acknowledged as they stood before the weathered cabin that first evening. "But it's ours, our land, our home." Willow squeezed his hand. "It's perfect." The cabin was indeed in need of repair. The roof leaked in one corner, the windows were drafty, and the floor had a pronounced tilt. But it had a solid stone fireplace and enough room for the essentials. Owen set to work immediately, repairing what he could and making plans for improvements. Willow planted a garden with Mrs. Parker's seeds, coaxed the ancient cookstove into working order, and made curtains for the windows from fabric she'd brought from Fort Laramie. By the end of their first month, the cabin had begun to feel like home. Owen found work helping neighboring ranchers while he built up their own herd, starting with 2 cows and a bull purchased from a rancher, reducing his stock. Willow sold eggs from their chickens and extra vegetables from her garden in town, slowly building relationships with their new neighbors. Unlike Fort Laramie, Silver Creek knew nothing of Jacob Turner or Willow's past. Here, she was simply Mrs. Sutton, the new rancher's wife with the pretty smile and excellent garden. The freedom of it was exhilarating, to be judged on her present actions rather than past associations. "You're happier," Owen observed one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. "There's a lightness to you now." Willow nodded. "I feel like I can breathe here, like I'm finally living my own life, not one defined by Jacob's shadow." "Good," Owen said, brushing a kiss against her temple. "That's all I've wanted for you." As summer turned to fall, their little ranch began to take shape. Owen added a room to the cabin, built proper stalls in the barn, and constructed fencing for the expanding herd. Willow preserved fruits and vegetables for winter, made cheese from their cow's milk, and created a home that welcomed the occasional visitor with warmth and hospitality. They made friends the blacksmith's family, the young doctor and his bookish wife, the elderly couple who ran the general store. No one questioned Willow's past or looked at her with suspicion. Here, she and Owen were writing their story from scratch. Winter came early to the mountains, bringing snow that transformed their valley into a glittering wonderland. The cabin, now properly insulated and expanded, kept them warm through the cold months. They spent evenings by the fire, reading aloud from their small collection of books, making plans for spring, and sharing the simple joy of being together. It was during one such evening in February that Willow shared her news. "I think," she said carefully, setting aside her mending, "that we might need to add another room to the cabin before next winter." Owen looked up from the bridle he was repairing. "Oh, planning to take in boarders?" he teased, Willow's lips curved in a small, secret smile. "Not exactly, but we will have another resident." She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "A very small one." For a moment Owen didn't move, his expression frozen in confusion. Then understanding dawned, and he was across the room in 2 strides, kneeling before her chair. "Willow," he breathed, placing his hand over hers. "Are you saying—" She nodded, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "In late summer, if the doctor's calculations are correct." Owen let out a whoop of joy so loud that it startled their cat from its place by the fire. He lifted Willow from her chair, spinning her in a circle before setting her down with sudden gentleness. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I shouldn't. Is that safe? Are you well? Do you need anything?" Willow laughed, cupping his worried face in her hands. "I'm perfectly fine, my love. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But not my wife, not carrying my child." Owen's voice was thick with emotion. He knelt again, pressing his face to her middle. "Our child, our family." "Our future," Willow whispered, running her fingers through his hair. "The one we've been building all along." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Willow bloomed like the wildflowers dotting their land, her face glowing with health and anticipation. Owen fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and hiring a local boy to help with the heavier ranch work so he could be closer to home. "You're being ridiculous," Willow told him after he rushed home from town one afternoon because storm clouds were gathering, and he didn't want her to be alone during thunder. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain." "Humor me," Owen replied, unrepentant as he stacked wood by the fire in case the storm knocked down power lines. "It's my first time being a father." Willow's expression softened. "And you'll be a wonderful one." Their son, Samuel Parker Sutton, was born on a crisp September morning in 1876, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. He had Owen's dark hair, and when he finally opened them, Willow's blue eyes. "He's perfect," Owen whispered, cradling his son with hands that trembled slightly. "Absolutely perfect." Willow watched them, exhausted but filled with a joy so complete it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had never dared to hope for during those dark days in Fort Laramie, not just survival, but this fullness of life, this abundance of love. News of Samuel's birth brought visitors bearing gifts and congratulations. Mrs. Dr. Wilson brought a handmade quilt. The blacksmith's wife arrived with a pot of stew and practical advice about colic. Even the banker stopped by with a small silver cup engraved with the baby's initials. "You've made quite an impression on this town," Owen observed after the latest visitors had departed. "Everyone seems half in love with you." Willow smiled, watching their son sleep in the cradle Owen had crafted. "Not everyone, just the ones who matter." As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered alongside him. Owen's careful management and hard work paid off in a steadily increasing herd and a reputation for quality. Willow's garden expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes, and she began selling preserves and baked goods to the general store for extra income. They added more rooms to the cabin, eventually transforming it into a proper house with a stone foundation and a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. They hired help, a young cowhand named Billy who hero worshipped Owen, and occasionally a local girl to help Willow with heavier chores. In the spring of 1879, Willow gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Martha Sutton, after both their mothers. Sam, now 3, approached his role as big brother with solemn responsibility, bringing his favorite wooden horse to share with the baby and explaining to visitors that Lizzie is little, but she'll grow. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons: planting and harvesting, calving and branding, summer heat and winter snow. There were hard times: a drought that stressed their cattle and crops, a winter so severe they lost part of the herd, a fever that swept through the town and kept the doctor riding day and night to tend the sick. But through it all, Owen and Willow faced each challenge together, their partnership only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. In the summer of 1883, a letter arrived from Fort Laramie. Mrs. Parker wrote that her husband had passed peacefully in his sleep, and she would be selling the ranch and moving to live with her sister in Denver. "I would be so pleased," she wrote, "if you and your family could attend the auction. I should like to see you once more, and to meet the children I've heard so much about from mutual acquaintances." Owen and Willow discussed it at length. They hadn't returned to Fort Laramie since leaving 8 years earlier. The memories, especially for Willow, were mixed at best, but Mrs. Parker had been kind when few others were, and paying their respects seemed the right thing to do. "Are you sure you're ready to face that town again?" Owen asked as they prepared for the journey. Sam, now 7, was excited about the adventure, while 4-year-old Lizzie was mostly concerned about who would feed her pet rabbit while they were gone. Willow folded a dress into her trunk, considering the question. "I think so," she said finally. "I'm not that frightened girl anymore. Fort Laramie has no power over me now." They made the journey by train as far as possible, then by rented wagon for the final stretch. As they approached Fort Laramie, Willow felt a strange mixture of emotions: nostalgia, apprehension, but most surprisingly, a sense of gratitude. For all its cruelty, this place had set her on the path to Owen, to their children, to the life they'd built together. The town had changed somewhat: new buildings, new faces. But as their wagon rolled down the main street, Willow recognized enough to feel the weight of memory pressing on her. "That's where Papa saved Mama from the mean shopkeeper," Sam announced, pointing to the general store. Owen had told the children a simplified version of how he and Willow had met, focusing on his role as her defender rather than the darker aspects of her past. "That's right," Owen said, winking at Willow. "Your mama was the prettiest girl in town, and I wasn't about to let anyone be unkind to her." "Were you really the prettiest, Mama?" Lizzie asked, her eyes wide. Willow laughed. "I don't know about that, sweet pea. But your papa thought so, and that's what mattered." They stayed at the hotel, the same one where Willow had once worked, though under new management now. A few old-timers recognized her, their reactions ranging from awkward nods to genuine smiles of welcome. Most, however, simply saw a well-dressed woman with a handsome husband and 2 beautiful children, a family like any other passing through. The auction at Parker's ranch was well attended, with ranchers from all over the territory coming to bid on his prized cattle and equipment. Mrs. Parker, now white-haired but still straight-backed and sharp-eyed, embraced Willow warmly when they arrived. "Let me look at you," she said, holding Willow at arm's length. "Motherhood suits you, my dear, and these must be the children I've heard so much about." Sam shook her hand solemnly, as Owen had taught him, while Lizzie hid shyly behind Willow's skirts until coaxed out with the promise of lemonade and cookies. Later, after the auction had concluded and the children were playing with others their age under the watchful eye of the ranch cook, Mrs. Parker drew Willow aside. "I always knew you would find happiness," she said, her lined face softening with affection. "Even in your darkest days, there was a light in you that refused to be extinguished." Willow squeezed the older woman's hands. "You were kind to me when kindness was scarce." "I've never forgotten that." Mrs. Parker's eyes twinkled. "And now look at you, a successful rancher's wife, mother of 2 beautiful children, respected and admired in your community. You've built quite a life, my dear." "We have," Willow agreed, watching Owen across the yard, deep in conversation with another rancher. "Together." That evening, after the children were asleep in their hotel room under the watchful eye of a hired girl, Owen suggested a walk. The summer twilight was warm, the streets quieter than they had been during the day. Without discussing it, they found themselves following the familiar path toward the river, toward the small cabin that had been Willow's refuge and prison. "It's gone," Willow said softly when they reached the spot. In its place stood a larger house, neatly painted with curtains in the windows and a rocking chair on the porch. "Progress," Owen said, slipping an arm around her waist. "Nothing stays the same." They stood in silence, watching the river flow past, the same river that had witnessed their first tentative steps toward love. "Are you disappointed?" Owen asked. "That the cabin's gone," Willow shook her head. "No, I carry what matters with me." She turned to face him, reaching up to trace the beloved lines of his face, now weathered by years of working in the Colorado sun. "You saved me, Owen Sutton." "No," he said firmly, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "You saved yourself. You were already standing up to this town when I found you. All I did was remind you that you weren't alone. And then you made sure I never would be again," Willow said softly. Owen smiled, the same smile that had first captured her heart outside the general store all those years ago. "Best decision I ever made." They returned to Silver Creek 2 days later, their wagon loaded with small treasures from the auction, Mr. Parker's favorite rocking chair, which Mrs. Parker insisted they take, a set of leather-bound books for Sam, who had inherited his mother's love of reading, a china doll for Lizzie, who named it Mrs. Parker and gave it a place of honor in her bedroom. Life resumed its familiar patterns, but Willow found herself reflecting often on their visit to Fort Laramie. The town that had once seemed so powerful, so judgmental, now appeared smaller in her memory, less significant. It was just a place where her story with Owen had begun, but not the place that defined her. Years passed. The children grew. Sam, tall and thoughtful like his father, developed a talent for breeding and training horses. Lizzie, with her mother's determination and her father's charm, became the darling of the local school, winning spelling bees and recitation contests. The railroad brought more settlers to Silver Creek, transforming it from a small outpost to a proper town with a schoolhouse, a church, and eventually, a small library that Willow helped establish, donating books and time to ensure that others had access to the stories and knowledge she treasured. In 1888, when Sam was 12 and Lizzie 9, Willow gave birth to their third child, a daughter they named Rose, who arrived with her father's dark hair and a spirit that seemed determined to keep up with her older siblings from her first day. 3 children, Owen marveled as he cradled his newest daughter. "When I met you, I didn't dare hope for even this much happiness." Willow, watching from the bed, smiled tiredly. Nor I. But look what we've built, Owen. Look at our life. Their ranch had grown to nearly 500 acres, their herd to over 200 head of cattle. The original cabin was now the core of a sprawling ranch house with wide windows that framed views of the mountains. They employed several hands year-round and more during busy seasons. But more than the material success, they had built a family bound by love and mutual respect, a place in the community as people who could be counted on in times of need, a legacy of kindness and integrity that their children absorbed through daily example. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1894, the entire town of Silver Creek seemed to turn out for a celebration at their ranch. Tables laden with food stretched across the yard, a fiddle player and guitarist provided music for dancing, and lanterns hung from tree branches, casting a golden glow over the festivities. "A toast," called Dr. Wilson, who had delivered all 3 Sutton children, "to Owen and Willow Sutton, who came to us 20 years ago as newlyweds and have since become the very heart of Silver Creek." Cheers rose from the gathered crowd. Willow, standing beside Owen with Rose perched on her hip, felt tears sting her eyes at the genuine affection in those cheers. Later, when the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Owen led Willow to their favorite spot on the porch, where 2 rocking chairs, one of them Mr. Parker's, faced the mountains. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Sutton," he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. 20 years deserves something special." Willow unwrapped the package to find a delicate gold locket. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of their family, Owen and Willow in the center, surrounded by their 3 children, all smiling at the camera. "It's beautiful," she whispered, immediately fastening it around her neck. "I'll wear it always." "I have something for you too," she admitted, going inside briefly to retrieve a parcel she'd hidden away, "though it's not as lovely as the locket." Owen unwrapped the gift, a fine leather-bound journal with his initials embossed on the cover. "It's perfect," he said, running his fingers over the tooled leather. "But what shall I write in it?" "Our story," Willow suggested. "For the children and maybe someday their children. So they know where they came from, how their family began." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "I like that idea, though some parts might need editing for younger readers," he added with a mischievous smile that, even after 20 years, still made Willow's heart beat faster. "Just the important parts," Willow said, leaning against his shoulder as they gazed at the starlit sky. "How a shunned woman and a wandering cowboy found each other against all odds. How they decided to build their future alone, only to discover they weren't really alone at all. How they created a home, a family, a legacy of love," Owen continued, his arm tightening around her. "How they discovered that sometimes the hardest beginnings lead to the most beautiful journeys." Willow turned her face to his, seeing in his eyes the same devotion that had sustained them through 20 years of joy and hardship, triumph and challenge. "And how they lived happily ever after," she suggested. Owen's smile was tender as he leaned down to kiss her. "That part," he murmured against her lips, "we're still writing day by day, year by year, and I wouldn't change a word of it." As night deepened around the house they had built together, Willow reflected on the long road from that dusty street in Fort Laramie to this moment of perfect contentment. She thought of the young woman she had been, frightened, shamed, but still standing. She thought of Owen, extending his hand when everyone else had turned away. She thought of their children, sleeping soundly under this roof, unaware of how close their mother had once come to surrendering to despair. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, his voice gentle in the darkness. "That when you said we'd build our future alone, it wasn't a sentence," Willow replied, her fingers finding his. It was a promise, the best promise anyone ever made to me. Owen brought her hand to his lips. And I intend to keep it, for as many years as we have left. For as many years, Willow agreed, and beyond.